Okay, everybody, I think we're going to kick off the afternoon session. So welcome, everyone, to this session on housing and estate regeneration. So slightly different scale to some of the stuff we were just talking about with new towns. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Leo Hammond. I'm past chair of the Urban Design Group and on the current Urban Design Group Executive Committee. I am an urban designer by training. I've worked on council housing and estate regeneration schemes at Cabe, at Pollard Thomas Edwards and Lambert Smith Hampton. And I'm now client-side at the London Borough of Haringey. I'm working on several significant estate regeneration schemes and council housing schemes, mainly across Tottenham on the east side of the borough. So we've got a couple of wonderful speakers for you this afternoon. You can give a little wave, they'll be coming up. So we've got Ken Rorrison, Head of Regeneration Strategic Design at Hackney Council. Do you want to give a little wave, Ken? No, you don't have to. And then we've got Hilary Satchwell, Director from Tibbalds as well. A little wave from Hilary. Thank you. So we'll be hearing from them shortly. Professor Matthew Carmona sends his apologies. I'll be doing a presentation on his behalf on his research on tackling inequality in housing design. So, format, just very quickly. So why this event and why now? Well, council housing is now back thanks to changes in legislation, essentially allowing councils to borrow money again. And this in turn is leading to a greater focus on estate regeneration. Plus, we have the government's political drive, we heard about this morning, house building, and also council housing as well, which the Housing Secretary, Matthew Pennycook, talking about house building generally, that he wants to turbocharge. Classic government stuff. Let's turbocharge it, yeah. Anyway, I look at this with a slightly different lens and would want this government drive to be about building mixed tenure neighbourhoods and building places, not just houses, house building. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing town building, place building, neighbourhood building, something we at the Urban Design Group campaign for. So the format for this session is going to be an introduction from myself. We're going to do a bit of a potted history of regeneration schemes. It's going to be quite interactive, so hopefully you're not feeling that post-lunch slump. We're going to be hands up, shouting out, stuff like that. And then we're going to hear from Ken on all the wonderful things that Hackney are doing. We're going to get a wider perspective on regeneration from Hilary and estate regeneration and council housing. And then I'm going to give an overview of Matthew Carmona's work on tackling inequality in housing design, something that we think is quite close to estate regeneration and council housing. And then hopefully, I'm sure we'll have 15 minutes or so for questions and debate. It's quite an emotive subject for a lot of people, so we're happy to get into the nitty-gritty of it. So please, if we could hold questions till then. So, for me, I'll do 10-15 minutes on a bit of an overview on council housing, but I wanted to start a kind of my journey as to kind of why I'm interested in this and why others might be as well. So for me, council housing and estates are a real inspiration. The boy in the image here, just down there, is me, age 4, with much more hair, and I've sat with my dad in our garden at home in Hackney in 1980. I could see these tower blocks of the Holly Street estate. You can see them, the 4 of them, in the background there from my bedroom window. And I was kind of fascinated as a kid that like, these huge buildings were there amongst these kind of Victorian street patterns. My mum brilliantly took this photo. I use it on a lot of my presentations. So grateful to my old mum. She pulled it out of a photo app. She said, Leo, I'm sure I've got something for you somewhere that will help you for your presentation. Anyway, I went from playing on my bike in the snake blocks at Holly Street Estate to school projects on the redevelopment of local council estates in Hackney as a kid. You know, whenever there was a geography project, I was like, can I go and look around the estate? And they were like, yes, but be careful. And then I went on to do my urban design master's thesis at Berkeley, looking at the design of council housing in San Francisco and London. And there's actually quite a lot of commonalities and lessons to be learned from both sides. I won't be talking about that today, though. But do grab me after if you want to chat about that. But anyway, where did council housing in the UK start? We're going to quickly look at some examples and how they've been regenerated or redeveloped, just to kind of whet our appetite for the speakers who are going to follow it. These schemes generally fall into one or more of these categories. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with these. There's kind of demolition and rebuild, something that happens less and less today, but did happen a lot and is still happening today. Infill, which we're seeing more and more of, those garage sites, those unused spaces, or retrofit. When we're thinking about carbon and other elements and also finances, retrofit can be another answer, or often it's a combination of all three. So, let's go back to the beginning. The first major generation of council housing in the UK dates back a bit over 100 years. In fact, in 1918, Lloyd George and his promise to make Britain a fit country for heroes to live in. This was shortened in the press to something I'm sure you're all familiar with, Homes for Heroes. So you've got other estates before, like Boundary Street, which is often, said as the example of first council housing. Yes, it is, but the LCC didn't have to do it. They didn't have, they weren't given money by the government or have a duty to actually build new housing. And that's what the 1919 Housing and Town Planning Act, which Lloyd George brought in, actually did. Through the 1920s, much of the early council housing focused on new suburban garden estates, where densities were lower and it was houses rather than flats. So here we go, we're going to do some interaction. Who knows this scheme? Just shout out. No, you're not a million miles away. What's the estate called? Yeah, very good, Beacon Tree, thank you. So this is the Beacon Tree estate in Dagenham. It's still one of the largest council estates in the world. Some people say it is the largest. 29,000 homes. Goodness me, we're not going to get near that figure on this potted history. And it was built in the 20s by London County Council. Be First and Archeo have created a retrofit plan with residents, and they've also started to put new flats in on infill sites. So these are actually flats. I think there's 15 flats in there. So let's whiz forward in time. So interwar, 1930s, and here the focus is moving into kind of elements of health with housing fit for human habitation was one thing that was talked about. And this was in response to the link between poor health and poor housing conditions. And the focus moved from houses to flats. Schemes in the UK look to continental Europe, for example, such as Karl Marx Hof public housing in Vienna, which really is wonderful. Some of you might have visited. I've been lucky enough to visit. If you find yourself in Vienna, I'm the sort of person, I just take my family around. We were on holiday in Vienna. I was like, should we just go off? Let's leave this cafe. I've had enough cakes. Let's go and see Karl Marx Hof. So sort of various moans from different members of my family, and we went to see it. Anyway, you can see the arch here. You can see various elements that you will see in schemes which followed in the UK. And then are actually being recreated now. Maybe Hilary will tell you about one of her schemes, which is very similar in Camden. So who knows this one? Quarry Hill. Very good. It is Quarry Hill in Leeds. 900 homes it was built for. Built and designed by Leeds City Council. The flats featured all mod cons, as well as a swimming pool for residents. So all very well intentioned, however, and we're going to see this a few times, it fell into disrepair, poor maintenance, and then social and crime problems which followed. Not all the fault of the people that planned and built it, but probably, partly to do with the design. It was demolished in 1978. The redevelopment is well underway. There's now the Leeds Playhouse Theatre, BBC Yorkshire, Leeds Conservatoire, etc., and lots of flats and trendy food and drink establishments. I think it's now, I looked it up, it's now being marketed as Soho, so they're trying to get a bit sort of New York and cool. Anyway, that's what happened to Quarry Hill. That's the Quarry Hill story. Let's move forward in time. We're going to go decade by decade. We're into the 40s now. So, World War II, bomb damage, housing shortages, so further government-led council house building programmes. It is really ramping up now. So here's an early post-war scheme that started construction in the late 1940s. Who wants to tell me what this one is? Sorry? Woodbury Down, from the man from Hackney. Very good. So it's another LCC scheme. Approximately 2,000 homes when it was built, tad under, on what was at the time farm and woodland. We'll see in the future it's kind of the focus is on slum clearance. This was on farm and woodland. Here's another scheme with new homes with all mod cons, a library, schools, community centre, health centre and shops. So you're a mixed-use scheme, wonderful stuff. Yet by the 1990s, yep, you guessed it, our old friends, poor maintenance, social and crime problems, unfortunately. In stepped Hackney Council with a very deep-pocketed joint venture partner, Berkeley Homes, And it rolled in kind of demolition and rebuild. I think there have been 3 master plans. Most of it's been done master planning-wise by Fletcher Priest. And I think they've done an excellent job, I think, of the layout of the first phases. I don't know if I can point with this. But anyway, you can see the water here. Keep close to the microphone. The water here, and then routes going down for waterside views, but also the public realm is open to everybody. Anybody can come here. You can be a visitor, you can be a resident, you can come down and visit it. Plus, we've still got the mixed-use element. And you have to hand it to Hackney and Berkeley Homes. They saw the potential of the water, nearby tube station, very important as well, also Piccadilly line. I grew up down the road and it was a no-go area that looked like it had no future in the early 90s. And the transformation is amazing. The reservoir was opened by David Attenborough, it's now a nature reserve. Clever layout, the waterside views, and the wonderful landscape as well. I take my kids up there now to play and hang out. They don't believe me when I tell them what it used to be like and how their granny, my mum, told me never to go there on my bike. I mean, it couldn't be more wonderful and safe feeling now. So we're moving on, we're into the 50s now, and the building programme ramping up quickly after World War II, and it was used to kickstart the construction industry. In 1953, almost 250,000 homes were built. 250,000! The government would love to have that figure for a year now, and that was just for council homes. I mean, figures are staggering how they were knocking this stuff out. New ideas were stirring, influenced by Corbusier and other modernist architects and planners. Precast concrete construction was coming in, towers and large areas of green space. Right, we all know this one, don't we? Yeah, Park Hill. So it was conceived and built in the late 1950s, it was completed in 61, by Sheffield City Council and had approximately 1,000 homes. Planners were now identifying what they called slums, a term that was becoming more and more popular in the 50s. And they argued these slums needed clearing to make way for new houses and their new ideas. There's, of course, the famous decks or streets in the sky with views of the Pennines. So again, very well intentioned again. Shops and other services were mixed in. And the attention to detail was amazing. They took residents who were on the ground floor in their normal streets, normal houses, next door neighbours, and they took them and put them in the sky as next door neighbours. You know, real thought and care went into it. But anyway, you can guess what happened next. Poor maintenance, crime, and social problems, unfortunately. And by the early 2000s, most residents had moved out, and it was sold by Sheffield City Council for what was reported as £1 to Urban Splash. And with places for people, they'd be retrofitting and renovating the building. So I told you about those 3 different categories. We've got retrofit here. Mix of tenures, Hawkins Brown did the first phase, Michael Richards have done the second phase. I've been round and seen the Hawkins Brown phase, and it really is quite inspiring. I'm sure some of you have seen it too. If you haven't, it's really worth to go and see. What's been achieved in the communal areas as well as the flats, they've actually narrowed the walkways, so the flats are a little bit bigger, and that huge deck, which the, you know, amazing images have seen the milk float go by and all of that I'm sure lots of us have seen, that's now been narrowed. And it's also been the inspiration for other things. Some of you might have seen the musical Standing at the Sky's Edge last year. I don't know if it's still on, but it's wonderful, which tells the story of the estate. It's extremely good, and I actually managed to bring the family along to that rather than dragging them out on holiday to somewhere. I thought I'd take them to a musical. So something a bit different for my urban design suffering family. So let's get into the 60s. Oh, here we go. This is it, not too long ago. So we've got the new block over here, and then you can see what it was like before, and those decks are just behind. So when we go into the 60s, so I've got 2 stories for you in the 60s. The good, I mean, I've lumped in the bad and the ugly together into the second one. So let's start with the good, let's be positive. Things were in full flow by the 60s across the country with good and bad results. So here's the good. Through the 60s, architect departments and local authorities were established to plan and design these new council homes. These were the places with the newest thinking on urban design, and it was being explored and built out. One of the most famous is Sidney Cook's Architects Department at the London Borough of Camden, and we're seeing elements of these departments again today. Who knows this estate? Alexandra Road, one of my favourites. and one of my favourite architects as well, with the terraces, the ziggurat flat blocks facing onto pedestrian streets. Yeah, when I was a kid, I kind of had pictures like this on my wall and kind of, you know, Neve Brown and others. And here is the great man himself at home in one of the flats and estates he designed, which I used to walk through on my way to school when I went to school in Camden for sixth form. It's the Dunboyne estate near Gospel Oak. And one of my heroes then, I wanted to get him into this presentation. Right, the bad and the ugly of the 60s. So, who knows this one? It is the Gorbals, thank you. So this is one of the most brutal examples. It's an extreme, I know, but if we're talking about estate and estate regeneration, I think we do need to talk about the Gorbals. It was built by Glasgow Corporation with the main buildings designed by Sir Basil Spence. Now get this, people. It featured 12 seven-storey deck access blocks with 759 flats, two 24-storey blocks with 384 flats, and had a further two slab blocks. So that's 16 high-rise buildings in an area that had no high-rise buildings. I don't need to tell you what happened here. We know the story now. Damp, mould, crime, social problems. Most of the tower blocks, well, in fact, all of the tower blocks are gone. This is a slightly old image. CZWG did most of the master planning work, and I think it's actually very good. It's mid-rise perimeter blocks. We can see the perimeter blocks here. With shared spaces in the middle with some typical sort of CZWG elements of fun and panache. Might have dated a little bit, but I think it's rather quite good. And these two tower blocks are now gone. They were demolished in 25, earlier this year. Again, another one I visited rather madly on a very long train trip from London, but definitely worth seeing. I wish I'd had more time there. So we're moving into the 70s now. We're getting up to the present day. We've seen quite a few examples of different estates and how they've been regenerated one way or another. And things have started to turn in the 60s. There was the explosion at Ronan Point, which killed 2 people in East London. And urban design started getting going. Urban design and community engagement movement, making inroads into campaigns against these kind of large estate tower block demolition schemes. I'm sure nobody's going to guess this one from this image. This is Dover Court in Islington. And again, it's just down the road from where I grew up. It was designed in the late 1960s. And for me, it's more of a 1970s scheme. It's only got one tower. I think it would probably plan to have more, and then Ronan Point happened. And lower-rise stacked maisonettes, along with a lot of leftover weird spaces. Garages, little bits of play that don't really work. And a few years ago, Islington Council commissioned Paula Thomas Edwards architects to look at the estate. And the resulting scheme, I think, is a very good example of infill, with garages and leftover spaces used for new homes. Backs and fronts, real issue with that, they were fixed, along with retrofitting the existing buildings and providing new open spaces and, importantly, a community centre. So all of this is stitching the estate back together to be a place and not just a mishmash of buildings and spaces. So we're getting up to the present day. So as we've seen through the 70s, it really was, council estates were increasingly linked with poor build quality, social failure and crime. That was partly to do with the people that were being put in the estate, not support for them, and partly to do with the buildings and a multitude of other things as well. So this is the Holly Street estate in the 90s. It's roughly the time I went round doing my self-chosen geography A-level project on estate regeneration, talking to residents, doing scribbles, stuff like that. And by the 1970s, families didn't want to live in a council house anymore. You can't blame them when they become like this. And council estates increasingly became, unfortunately, more a ghetto for the poorest in society, or certainly in big urban areas like London, and a far cry from Lord George's kind of homes fit for heroes idea. And towards the end of the 70s, public money just ran out for new council housing in the UK. The country almost went bust. It was bailed out by the IMF. However, from 1945 to 1980, it'd be a golden period for council house building, with about 4.4 million just council homes built between those years. I got this image because it was actually, I got it from a website called, I couldn't find my old geography A-level project, and my parents have thrown it away, but it's from Pirate Memories, and it's because there was a famous pirate radio station. Those are the sort of things that were going on in the 90s on the roof of this block in Holly Street. So we know what comes next. Big changes, 1980s, right to buy, Margaret Thatcher, and council housing delivery just came to a stop. That was it, funding removed. Here's Thatcher pictured with one of the first families to buy a council house to be sold in the UK. And it was the first time in decades the council housing stock was being depleted. It's just been signed off. We did all those 4.4 million, and now they're just going, every year, down, down, down. And of course, it has a big knock-on effect, leaseholders, for how people like me have to make estate regeneration work, because you've then got blocks with leaseholders here, there. Some of the estates I'm working on, you've got 30% leaseholders who need to be consulted on, talked to, and then sometimes lengthy CPO processes as well. So following this period, into the 90s, social housing became the responsibility of housing associations or via Section 106 agreements as part of developer-led housing schemes. So, luckily, through the 2010s and up to 2018, the local government borrowing cap was scrapped. It was scrapped by Theresa May in 2018 after kind of watering it down. And this paved the way for kind of the second generation of council housing to be built. Local authorities allowed to borrow, take on debt again, and to invest that in council housing. And for teams to be assembled, teams like my team and Ken's team as well in Hackney, we've now got these teams that certainly didn't exist in the 80s and the 90s. We're going to hear from Ken shortly about the Hackney experience, what they're doing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Haringey in a second. But many councils now see this as an opportunity to not just deliver housing numbers, but also to drive up design quality, increase affordability, improve health outcomes, reduce homelessness, ignite placemaking initiatives, and deliver more sustainable buildings and places. This is just a snapshot on the top left of kind of what we're doing in Haringey, completed schemes and schemes we've got on site, anything from 1 home to like 400, 500. And you can just see the graph on the right-hand side. You can see how much public housing we were delivering in the 60s and the 70s in this country and how it dribbles off the end over there with just housing associations doing it. So just very briefly, last slide. In many cases, these council-led schemes are mixed tenure. Market for sale homes is the typical model, subsidising council homes, which in turn creates balanced communities. So one example of that is the High Road West scheme, which is right next to Spurs in Haringey, which is a joint venture with Lendlease for 2,500 mixed tenure homes and some other goodies, community leisure buildings, new public realm and a town square. But what we're seeing more of, or certainly in Haringey, and I know in other boroughs as well, is schemes being embedded on the estate. So I now work in the Broadwater Farm Estate. That is Broadwater Farm Estate there. That is our approval, which is now on site for 100% social rent. So this includes 300 new homes, all social rent, 800 refurbished homes, new shop units, business units, public realm, and all of that's done through grant funding and borrowing against the housing, the council's housing revenue account. We do a 50-year model for it to be repaid through rent. And the borough is on track to deliver a second generation of 3,000 council homes by 2031, more than 2,000 of which are already underway and completed. So, enough from me. Hopefully that's whetted your appetite. That's just what's happening in Haringey. Ken's now going to tell us about what's happening in Hackney. So let's welcome Ken up.
Thanks, Leo. I will need. I'll definitely need that. Yeah. Thank you very much, Leo. Thanks for that whistle-stop tour. Great early photograph of Hackney. Interesting. It doesn't look like that now, of course, and you'd expect it was denser, but in actual fact, all the blocks are gone, so it's actually it's kind of less dense. Yeah. So good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting Hackney to Suffolk. It's nice to get out. I'm the head of Regeneration Strategic Design. I'm an architect. I've been in Hackney nearly 9 years now. Extraordinary. And I came originally from private practice. Okay, right, I'll get the hang of it. Great. So, Regeneration Strategic Design, who are we? So we're a small team of architects. Long name, small team. I suppose the very fact we exist, I suppose, signals Hackney's commitment to placing design quality at the heart of what we do. We don't design, but we do set the conditions and the parameters to allow our externally employ design teams to do their best work and support the internal teams to make informed decisions. So I guess, helping them be a good client, it's that old adage, isn't it? You don't get good buildings without good clients. So we can help Hackney be a good client. Some demographics. So for those who don't know, we're a North East London borough, inner city borough, 280,000, about twice the population of Ipswich. Very diverse, got the largest Haringey Orthodox Jewish community in Europe. I'll touch on that a bit later. And it's a very young borough. I raise the average age massively every time I walk into a cafe. I'm not going to go through all these, but we still have very high levels of deprivation. There's lower life expectancy as well as rapid economic growth. It's a largely flatted borough. The average house prices are twice the national average. We've got incredibly high increasingly high private rents. We've got about 8,500 people on our waiting lists and a waiting time of between 3 and 39 years, depending on the size of home required. So there's definitely a need, as there is everywhere. And to part answer that need, we have running currently 3 direct delivery programs, delivering about 4,000 homes. We've delivered about 1,400 so far. That doesn't include Woodbury Down, separate issue. It's a development agreement with Berkeley Homes. This is direct delivery council homes I'm talking about. They're mixed tenure, as Leo said, cross-subsidy model. Slightly less reliant now on our own funding. We get greater GLA grant, but it's self-funded, and it's a portfolio approach. And what I mean by that is we balance tenure and home size across all the sites, not on individual sites, and that helps a lot with viability. We're one of the first councils to start building. We started in 2011. Councils, as Leo's history said, a council hadn't built for 40 years. So there was a kind of loss of skills, and it's really taken, I guess, probably the last 10 years to establish those skills and the processes, which are critical to quality delivery. It's direct delivery. It's self-funded. It's generally design and build, although we do some hybrid development agreements as well. But history tells us it shouldn't only be about numbers and parts of the disaster scenarios that Leo outlined are maybe testament to that. And a reminder maybe that in the headlong rush to deliver numbers, which are clearly desperately needed, that should never be at the expense of quality, of making a place that contributes to its neighbourhood and is hopefully cherished and has a longevity. We have a huge legacy of social housing within the borough, good and bad, but both of which can be learnt from. It's this rich legacy, whether it's through acts of Victorian philanthropy, like Sylvester House here, or council-led delivery, like Wilton Way Estate. They have proven over a long period of time to provide enduring neighbourhoods, and which we look at, and we look to our design teams to actually draw on. And in particular, these early models, at their best, offer high density, are civic in scale, but domestic in detail, have a sense of communality in the public spaces, a care and attention to detail, and a considered approach to where money is best spent. And these principally interwar and post-war estates, often have produced quality housing in terms of space standards, but they often let down with their public realm. The spaces around and between the buildings are often dysfunctional and do not encourage appropriation and use. And so there's real lessons to be learned. And I guess we're constantly questioning, what greater contribution our new homes can make. They have to be good within themselves, clearly, but they also have to make a positive change to the neighbourhood and the city beyond. A couple of schemes then. Tower Court, 132 homes. One of our early estate regeneration programs, which removed homes before we built new ones. And this sits at the heart of the Haringey, the Jewish community. And I guess it's an example of how we we use Hackney's house building as an opportunity to bring further benefits to the established communities and the neighbourhood as a whole. It shows the added variety and richness that can be brought to house building through engaging meaningfully with existing communities and simply responding to people and place. There's a significant amount of larger homes in this. There's 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom homes, and many of which are now occupied by the Orthodox Jewish families, Let me say a little bit we talk a lot about tenure blind, being tenure blind, and I think maybe this scheme shows that tenure blind sort of goes beyond just a shared material palette to actually the idea of equally sharing the qualities of the site. And I suppose here the block massing takes the height away. It faces onto a park, a large park, but it's taking the block massing, or the height, away from the park edge. And that, together with the subtle shaping of blocks, shares the benefit of the park views to the maximum number of residents, rather than only to those fortunate enough to be directly on the park. And I suppose that's the difference between us as local authorities, as developer, and a private developer, because that response perhaps would have put all the height on the park, where there is maximum value, but of course to the detriment of everyone behind. Working with the Haringey Jewish community has influenced layout, detail, size of apartments, but it's also brought a richness to the facades. The balcony design, quite see it there, maybe in the next slide actually. Balcony design supports and facilitates the temporary structures of the Sukkot festival and characterizes the building of the rest of the year. Perhaps, clear on the next image. But I think it's an incredibly good example of how engagement and the embracing of differences and particularities leads to a responsive, rich environment, showing that difference and cohesion are both possible. And we're interested in making buildings of permanence that can both respond to the scale of the city, in this case responding to more civic buildings surrounding a synagogue and a church, and balancing that with a more domestic scale of everyday life. So we're constantly balancing the civic and the domestic, and just trying to carry the quality and detail of the public realm through to the communal entrance lobbies, to create a sense of arrival, a sense of dignity, a sense of identity. Here, at each entrance, an individual mosaic welcome mat reflecting the residents, they named the blocks, and done by a local mosaic project. Playable landscape, a combination of practicality of the Suds drainage, these are the Suds swales, with bridges over, and play bridges, which I think there's 12 different bridges referencing London bridges, Hackney bridges, I think there's even one referencing Venice. And I think, with all the design teams we employ, we encourage levels of thought, care, and inventiveness. 2 other schemes, Taylor Chateau and King's Crescent, but it's this idea of extending the notion of neighbourhood, seeking out where the contribution and benefit lies, and never really working to a shrink-wrapped red line, so always looking beyond the boundary, and using the programme to reinforce, repair, and improve existing provision, bringing existing spaces into more meaningful use, realigning refuse collection strategy, safe bike storage, opening up safe, well-lit routes. Or just here on the right-hand side, just trying to seek a parity between refurbishment and new build, to try and ease the transition between the two, always conscious that we can be building shiny new things beside existing blocks that were perhaps having less maintenance. And we see the public realm really as acting as common ground between the tenures, between generations. Playable landscape, but also resting, calm opportunities. Between existing estates and new development, reconnecting routes which may have been severed with post-war planning, as pointed out by Leo. Straightforward wayfinding, understanding orientation, preferring to stop in a sunny spot rather than a shady one, although maybe starting to rethink that. But of course, there's also a limit to how much the built environment alone can make a difference. It can't be overly prescriptive, it can't be overly coercive. We can't make communities. Communities have to make themselves. But we can set up the conditions that send positive signals that hopefully act as a catalyst for positive actions. So this thought, care, attention to detail, seeking a sense of dignity are all basic tenets of good design. And we know design can have a positive impact on people's lives. It can affect self-esteem, sense of local, potentially national pride, identity, supporting a sense of well-being and a dignity. And places that delight become valued and cared for. Places that don't tend towards high maintenance, crime, social exclusion, poor health. And again, great examples, Leo, of perhaps all of that. We're working a whole range of scales. So this at perhaps the other end of the scale. This is 11 family houses at Chowdhury Walk. Young practice, Al Jawad Pike, that local hadn't built social housing before. 11 family homes, 7 social rent, 4 outright sale. Part of our housing supply program, which is our second program. And again, really thinking about the contribution to the neighbourhood. I mean, the delivery of 11 homes is much needed, obviously, but a key move here was opening up a new car-free route, which is very gratifying being there, actually seeing it now being used, a day-to-day route. It's a shorter journey, it links school and shopping, and it really, after 3 years, really feels embedded in the neighbourhood. And I guess that's the advantage of a local authority being the developer, ensuring that this contribution is actually delivered. And our idea of value is not purely monetary. It extends to social value, employment and skills, community value, urban value. And here, just seeking out, seeking out value through repetition and complexity through repetition, but making a rich and varied place through simple means. Very typical sites that we're looking at now are sites where we're less looking to remove homes. We're now working with infill sites, with garage sites. So this is very typical, lock-up garages, and bringing those into meaningful use. I guess small sites doesn't mean fast delivery, though. There's 23 party walls on this site. So it's hard and it's not fast. And I guess the aim always is to bring neighbourhoods with us. I think respecting the neighbours here through the scale of the building. And the simple, just about see that plan, the simple device of twisting the buildings to avoid direct overlooking. But it also gives a sense of place, an individual identity to an otherwise repetitive terrace. And I think this sensitivity to neighbours also as part generated the decision to use cross-laminated timber construction, which reduced dust on sites, faster and quieter to erect, and it's other than its more obvious carbon benefits. Just so start to finish up there, just some various views. You can see the idea of twisting it. You get these long oblique views rather than direct views overlooking the neighbours. And I just think, and also just carefully selecting special moments. Here placing a one-off window on the street gable. So just adding a richness to the existing street. A point of distinction and identity. And again, that whole thing about balancing the civic, albeit in a small scale way, with the domestic. Finally, our new homes program, the more we build, the more we learn. And the more we gain confidence as a council. And we now have built examples to demonstrate that and impart that confidence to our existing and future residents, to our potential contractors, and to our design teams. So it becomes a virtuous circle. And that early learning is looped back, and it's been looped back into our new homes program brief. So there's 10 years of learning now in our brief. So incredibly comprehensive, and I hope clear and easy to work with for our teams. We also recognise that we're actually in a very different economic climate now, and our new brief is perhaps more prescriptive than before. We operate tighter sets of metrics, net to gross, wall to floor ratios, etc. but we still have the same quality aspirations. And that confidence, and I guess now having the infrastructure within the office, also means we can look beyond simply compliance schemes. And we're now bringing forward about 50% of the new homes programme as passive house. So we're starting to then stretch the parameters that we're working within. So I hope the few examples I've shown, together with all the work we're delivering, I hope that sends a kind of clear signal that many local authorities have the vision and the skills in place now to play a vital role in meeting housing targets, but perhaps more importantly, making enduring neighbourhoods. So, central government, are you listening? Thank you.
Brilliant. Wonderful stuff from Ken. Thank you very much. We're now going to hear from Hilary Satchwell from Tibbalds. So, Hilary, it's all yours. This is to nudge it on. It's just
Brilliant.
next.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and bring some of those things together in a way that we can think about what can we learn from this? What can we learn that will help us with other... So I'm trying to log into this so I can see my notes. So we can learn from other sites and other places. So, as we've heard, it's really not just housing numbers, but at the moment we hear a lot that makes it sound like it might just be housing numbers. So I want to think about what we can do, what we can make sure to go beyond that. So my background and Tibbalds' background is we do a lot of different sorts of projects, and I'm really interested in working on both estate regeneration, council-led housing, large-scale housing growth, best practice, and how we learn from one type of project, one type of developer, and how that informs another. My particular interest is really in about urban form, and I'm interested particularly in the ground level of places. How do we make places that feel really good to walk by? How do we make places that deliver public good in terms of the way the spaces work? The kind of things that we're hearing about from Ken and from Leo. And I think council-led housing can tell us quite a lot about that. And particularly, council-led housing tells us about engagement and working with people who have a vested interest and who are directly affected by the kind of things we need to be thinking about. So I'm going to talk about 3 things that try to bring these other themes together. The common types of council-led housing, and I'll use some examples that will tell us a little bit more about how some of these work, what we can get from them and their benefits, how they can help us deliver better places, and particularly, I will then finish up with some of the challenges. But I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly so we've also got time for discussion. So if I rattle through, happy to chat to anybody afterwards as well. So in thinking about all of these sites, we're thinking about good urban design principles, overlooking, active frontages, well-defined streets, enclosure, all of that stuff, often which is not what you find when you go to a council-led site. Council-led, so I need to remember to turn both of these at the same time. Council-led sites, as we've heard from Leo, can sometimes be interwar housing estates, often low density, varied ownership, over time, lots of leaseholders. Sometimes they work, sometimes they're so low density, it's very difficult to make even public transport work. We've got lots of post-war housing estates, which I think I might typify. They're not entirely like this in a modernist tradition of buildings in space. We all know about this. Urban design exists, I think, because of this failure to really think about what people need on the ground and the need to make that right. We've got councils having lots of leftover bits of land, so sometimes they're not estates at all. They're bits of land that they can do things with. They might be quite complex, they might have had former uses, and often we have things that are just no longer needed in the same way, and there's quite a lot of small sites and garage sites and things that we can think about how that works. Lots of big cities and towns, and see if anyone can guess where that one is, have a mixture of all of these things. And lots of councils across the whole country, not just in London, even though that's where lots of the examples are we're talking about, will have examples of all of these things. So they'll have a massive complexity of things to deal with. If we then think, and Leo referred to this, the different types of council-led projects that we see, I think there are 4 main types, and most projects either fit into one of these or they're a whole mixture of all of them or combinations of them. Infill sites and small sites. We see quite a lot of this as people find particularly large-scale regeneration really challenging, politically difficult, lots of hard things to do. This garage sites might fit into this, fitting in little bits around other projects. This is definitely the way that lots of sites are going. Might not be quick, but they might be quicker than having to move people and demolish things and do other things too. Partial redevelopment, so quite often we see large estates, and we've heard about these sort of projects where sometimes bits of it just don't really work. So let's see how we can make that better. Retrofit, definitely complete change in how we're thinking about retrofit in the last 5 years. We've seen quite a lot of big sites that previously were much more large-scale demolition. People are thinking again, right, should I be reusing this building? If so, how can I get the best out of it? And how can I make sure that there's real problems with how it hits the ground can be resolved? And then there are still large-scale wholesale regeneration projects, particularly given that some of these can deliver so much additional affordable housing, it's worth the impact that it will have on people, and you have to work with people and communities very carefully on that. But sometimes the change is worth it just for the extra housing and additional affordable housing that you will get. I think the relative benefits on people is something I'm going to touch on at the end. All of these have different impacts on the neighbours and people around it. And whatever we're trying to do for place, we've got to remember that place is actually about how people experience it. It's not some abstract thing separate from people who move around, who live there, or who visit. It's very much part of that conversation. So I want us to think about people and place as being intrinsic things. I think you're the perfect audience to be thinking about that. So I'm just going to go very quickly through 4 case studies that fit into different types of these housing examples, and then think, what were the challenges and what did we learn from each of them? So we can start really kind of learning, what do these models tell us about other things? How can they contribute to mending places, to putting roots back in, and generally making things work well? 2 of the sites are delivered as part of the early change that we started to see in the early 2010s. About housing delivery, and 2 of them are ongoing projects that have started to be delivered and have still got a long way to go. I think I want us to think particularly about the learning, and I'm not going to go into the detail of each project, but I think there's lots of good examples. I've focused on 4 that happen to be in London, but there are lots of good examples across the country. I've got a few of them in different parts of the presentation. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Regent's Park estate in Camden. This is a massive estate. It's like 3,000 homes. It was master planned by about 5 different architects in the 1960s. Some bits of it worked really nicely and are really lovely, some bits really rubbish. HS2 came along and they were going to demolish 3 or 4 blocks, and these people in these blocks, 150 homes, had to be rehoused within 2 years. No choice. HS2 would pay for it. So the question was, can we find spaces in this estate to deliver very quickly a particular number of homes, minimise impact, find no risk, get things delivered? It was a really interesting question because the question was really about speed and quality in a very large existing estate. Lots of underused spaces and leftover space, so we had all of those we could have a look at. We had to guarantee that residents could stay within 10 minutes walk of their existing home and would only move once. Really complex estate ownership, really complex uses, different typologies in different situations. I haven't moved on my slide. That's the one. The problem was about the pressure of time and residents knowing that we needed to do really good engagement and to work with them, but we had to also move super, super quickly, and those 2 things are sometimes slightly incompatible with each other. What I think we can learn from this one, and these were infill sites, there were 11 infill projects that were delivered all within about 2 years. There was a couple that were slightly later because we had to move a community hall and then build on that site, and that delivered additional homes. The infill sites are really high quality architecture, really small little sites. One of them was 3 homes. The biggest one was 24 homes. Each one of them could be a really interesting separate project, but they were delivered as part of this single programme. We really focused on focusing on filling in street gaps, building in corners to provide some definition, thinking about when front doors went, making the public realm work better for existing residents and new residents. responding with families of buildings. So there were several sites along one long street where the buildings weren't exactly the same, but they sat within a family. On the other side of the estate, there was another family of buildings. In the middle, the buildings were more different from each other. And we ran design competitions with architects to identify different people to deliver different blocks. We were able to really think about the challenge that you get when you have to deliver fast and with quality, but also able to really think about place at the same time. The next example is Custom House in Newham. This one is interesting because estate, not much had happened, very interested, much bigger estate, lots of interested residents, lots of thought things would be happening for years and years and years. Crossrail comes along. Suddenly the pressure for development, I mean, literally right next to a Crossrail station, it really changes the density conversation. You can't go super tall because we've also got an airport nearby, which has an impact on what we could do. Some of the homes definitely needed to be replaced. During the conversation about how the master plan would come together, retrofit became something much more considered. And we had to go back through an options process to say, actually, thinking again, how do we think about retrofit? How do we build in those routes? Some of those benefits that we could get from redevelopment, such as there's a little park to the southwest, which I think might be on one of the plans. Yeah, which I think you can just about see on the far north. There was a park that residents just couldn't really get to. There was a horrible cut through to get to it. And by redeveloping a couple of blocks, we could improve the connection to the park. Going back to retrofit meant, should we be doing that? How can we make that work? Do we still want to make that benefit? We had to think about an early kickstart phases, and actually this image is of the two kickstart phases. One of the most challenging things from a design and urban design point of view is the scale relationships. You can see here we've got 2-storey buildings very close to 10-storey buildings, and actually it gets slightly taller up to about kind of 12, 13 as we get to the station, which is on the right-hand side of this image. And those scale relationships, we had to be very clear. It's not about sameness, it's about making things that work. Difference isn't necessarily bad if we're really thinking about the impact, how much sunlight and daylight is still getting to those gardens. So we could think about those things all the same time. In terms of what the mixed approach, so an approach that had retrofit, it had retention, it had redevelopment, and to some extent, it started with an idea of large-scale redevelopment what we were able to deliver with this was different parts of the site could be responded to differently, and we could really hold on to this idea of re-evaluating and thinking what we needed from a really clear urban grain and really strong routes that get people to know where they wanted to do. I've talked already about this, but retrofit did change the approach. You can see in the middle of the site, there's some very low bits, which are retained buildings that will be retrofit. And the bottom right-hand corner, some of it's retrofit and some of it is replacement because it gets us through to this park. Early sites had to be able to come forward on things where there was no demolition needed, so there were 2 empty sites that at the moment didn't have any use, and that really helped us, so those effectively were infill sites in this. And clear communication with residents all the way through helped us move this project forward. The Bourne Estate in Camden, we started this a long time ago in 2011, I think, 2010, 2011. This is a very interesting, it's one of the earliest, I think it might be the 3rd ever housing estate that was built. It was planned in kind of 1902, 1903. Most of it was built kind of 1910, 1911. A very interesting urban form with the top part of the estate to the north of this green area, really coherent, really working well, a very strong pattern of blocks. And the southern bit didn't really work at all. There were some odd 60s infill blocks that just were on a slightly funny, they didn't really follow the street pattern. They just didn't really work. And some funny, there'd been some warehouse spaces here in the intervening years that were no longer there. So these spaces that were just kind of left. Residents really strongly wanted to protect some of the things they had on the estate, and that really made it quite hard for a long time. The ball court must stay where it is, but they didn't mean necessarily we worked out in the end. They didn't mind if it moved. And they really wanted to make sure that they still had a community hall. So it's holding on to the things that residents really wanted to happen. The plans on the top here are of the estate before we started, and the picture on the right is this ball court that must be protected at all costs, and the flank wall of the really nice part of the estate. And the plan on the bottom is where we were after the regeneration. Effectively, we continued this idea of the outer wall of the estate and then the inner blocks and the inner play area, so protecting the newly located ball court and the space that people wanted to use. And it's kind of mending the routes through. There'd always been a tension here of visitors in this very busy part of central London who were like, who are they sitting on our bench and what are they doing? And we were able to sort of delineate the more public and the less public areas by thinking about fairly simple urban design rules and how we could make that work, and delineating streets, making spaces clearer, thinking about how we retained the ball court in an intelligent way, and it turned out phasing was the answer. And the modern buildings clearly referenced history, but they didn't feel that they had to look exactly like the historic buildings that were there before. The next example is very large-scale regeneration. I mean, very, very large scale, more than 2,000 homes, a huge amount of commercial and other uses, a new college, all sorts of other uses mixed in here, connections into Stratford Station, a massive site right next to the Olympic Park. It had been through 15 years of regeneration projects that hadn't worked for a whole host of reasons, and the council decided to bring it back in-house. Most of the estate is very low-density two-storey homes, and there are 3 1960s towers, some of which not in a good state. We had to really think about how we could work with residents. This project started during the initial COVID lockdown, which, as you can imagine, was quite a challenging time to start a project. And people felt quite different. Oh, I need to move on, don't I? Right, I will move on. That's all good. That's all good. I like a timer. So the ideas here are very much based on listening to residents. They understood there needed to be a large amount of homes. They understood that was necessary, but also we could work with them to respond, to have the lower parts of the development around the central green space where they wanted them. Some of the council officers found this a bit challenging. They thought the tall building should be next to the open space and that the lower building should be around the edge, but residents really wanted it the other way around, with scale climbing up towards the railway lines and generally the edges of the building, really focused on edges of the site, really focused on better links and connections and balancing the need for scale and densities. I think that's the last one. What I really want us to think about is what we can learn. Oh, move this one on as well. What we can learn from each of these site typologies. We always have to balance trade-offs on any kind of site or project that we're looking at. And if you're doing, for example, infill in small sites, yes, you're not affecting any existing residents. Yes, you can infill and hopefully move forward reasonably quickly, although completely noting Ken's point about Party Wall. But you can overall often deliver fewer homes and fewer affordable homes. You've always got to balance how many homes are we trying to provide, who are we helping with, how can we minimise impact. So small sites can be good. There's some other example projects along the bottom. Interestingly, these all deliver about 100 and 150 homes, but they're all fit into these very different types of model. The partial redevelopment, Bourne Estate is a good example of this. Lots of the estate was kept. The bit that didn't work, we dealt with. That's something that is very helpful for lots of projects. We can balance the impact that we have versus the benefits that we can provide. Retrofit can be very useful. Carpenter's Estate had 3 1960s towers. 2 of them are being kept. The first one is part of the first phase of the development. One of the challenges of retrofit can be that you can't bring it up fully to current standards. In this case, the floor-to-ceiling heights just aren't high enough to do that. But we can still make really good homes out of these units. The last one is large-scale regeneration, which is really where a site is cleared and something else happens. We can often maximise numbers and really deliver as many homes that meet current standards on these sites, but the impact on residents is often that they will have to move, and sometimes they have to move twice because it takes a long time. So very quickly, I just want us to lastly not forget this stuff is actually really, really hard. Leo and Ken might make it sound super easy, but actually it's not. And there are lots of real challenges along the way, particularly for councils. And I think it's very hard if the primary purpose of your organisation is not building homes to also then build homes. The primary purpose of your organisation is something entirely different. So you've got to hold on to lots of things. You've got to hold on to what your organisational memory is, why we need people there for a long time to know why decisions were made. Residents often find it hard to trust the council because something happened or something bad is happening with maintenance or with other things, and so you've got to really kind of build relationships there. And I think the problem really, it's summarised at the bottom, is you're expected to do everything for everyone all at once, which is, I'm going to call impossible. So I think there's some really useful things we can learn about housing typologies, urban mending, as I've heard it called before, and really thinking about how we make good places. So thank you. And there's another Tower Court picture for anyone who wants to see some more.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, Hilary. That's really good. Lots of synergies with my day job, and I'm sure with your job. It's definitely difficult. Yes. It's definitely difficult. And you've got an election every 4 or 5 years, so makes it even harder as well. Right. I'm going to do a bit of Matthew Carmona. You can have a seat for a little bit, and then we'll come up and do a bit of Right, I'm going to do a quickie on this. Matthew's presentation is quite long. I chunked it down a lot last night, but we'll go through this quickly because I want to get onto Q&A and have some questions from you, because as I say, it's quite an emotive subject often. So finally, I'm going to talk about tackling inequality in housing design. This comes from a publication led by Matthew Carmona, who's Professor of Planning and Urban Design at UCL, who sends his apologies. Matthew and I go a long way back. He was my tutor, and I've been teaching on Matthew's master course at UCL for the last 10 years. I've also done some publications with him, but I should say I was not involved in this report. However, he asked me to present the findings here today, not least as the Urban Design Group contributed to the funding, and also some of the ideas on the project from our very own Robert Huxford. And we wanted to include some of this research, as many of the schemes in the report are affordable or council housing. So let's start by travelling back in time. 5.5 years ago, believe it or not, that was a few days before the pandemic hit, and some of you might remember the publication of a housing design audit for England. The audit reviewed the quality of 142 large-scale housing-led projects across England. And Matthew's team have got some quite sort of mad animations in here. I'm not quite sure all of them are. Let's see. There we go. Right, okay. I tried to practice them all yesterday, but I can't remember all of them. There'll be some spinning stuff in a bit. That led to national headlines that we as a nation were failing on design quality, and something that we've heard about today and the Urban Design Group campaigned for. But not all housing was revealed to be poor quality by the audit, not just a bad news story. Many projects around the country were classified as good or very good by the auditors. However, when correlated against relative affluence and sales values, it was apparent that these were often more expensive homes in more affluent areas, while disadvantaged areas routinely suffered the lowest quality housing environments. Unfortunately, no surprise there for anybody who's been at this for a bit. Two factors seem to be key. First, the private market quite simply works less well in such places with lower land values, leading to lower investment in all aspects of residential design. So the quality, as we can see here on the right, it's squeezed out, and any associated affordable housing or the house building becomes unviable. Oh, there's a spinning bit. This is perpetuated. The second is that more recent studies have shown that this has been perpetuated in large parts of the country through kind of austerity-driven cuts to public sector, and particularly to urban designers within authorities, particularly outside urban areas or outside London. And that's led to an over-reliance on kind of the more regulation elements of councils' planning, highways in particular, resulting in the delivery of substandard design and road-dominated layouts in places. So here we go, that sort of thing. But returning to the audit, critically, when correlating design quality with affluence and sales values, there are a few outliers that seem to buck the trend. And that raised the question, how did these schemes do it in areas of inequality? So it took about a year for Matthew and his team to deliver an answer. And it was essentially about seeking out those elusive projects where design quality has been successfully delivered in disadvantaged areas and learning the lessons from those experiences. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about that now with some case studies quite quickly, because I think there's some quite interesting examples here. So let's do some clickage here. So I'm not going to go into detail just because of time of kind of tracking down these stories. They had a robust research approach. The schemes had to be over 30 homes, and they had to be in disadvantaged areas. And Matthew and his team did that by looking in projects in kind of deciles 1 to 4 of the index of deprivation, or local authorities in the bottom 25%. Let's get on to some more interesting bits. So, for quality, the team combined an external audit with a healthy homes review using the TCPA's criteria and methodology. They took a score of good in the audit as a threshold for inclusion. In other words, kind of not every project would win tons of awards that they chose, but design quality was definitely higher and represented what Matthew has called a sizable step up from what would normally be achieved in such locations. So, 20 schemes were identified in these more deprived areas. They cover every English region. Here are the schemes here. I'm sure you'll know quite a few of them. We've got Woodbury Down, again, down here as well. And they were led and developed in a diversity of ways, different tenures, and a diversity of contexts, from kind of central areas to outer suburban. As regards density, I know how much us urban designers, we love density, don't we? So they range from 30 to 245 dwellings per hectare, with a rough average of kind of 72 in the mid-range. So all of this was to answer the key research question: how do some housing-led developments in economically and socially disadvantaged areas manage to buck the trend of substandard design and deliver high-quality, inclusive and sustainable urban development, particularly at the moment where we've got real financial constraints on delivery? So Matthew and the team kind of identified 10 routes to success and common paths. I'll briefly, some Matthew's rather funky animation there. So, they kind of cluster into kind of groups. So the first 6 are broadly concerned with the making of the development opportunity. And I'm going to throw in some case studies here. So route 1, creating place and value through design. This is kind of the classic regeneration path, reinventing post-industrial areas, of which we have a lot in this country. Here we're talking about kind of large-scale placemaking with inbuilt flexibility, so it could swing through economic cycles and still keep going. Rochester Riverside and Port Loop in Birmingham offer good examples. They saw front-loading of key public realm interventions to make a statement about the quality of the places being created. Route 2 is a related route, and that's building a market through architectural innovation, which appeals to key segments of the market, including environmental pioneers and those looking for something a bit different. This means differentiating projects either functionally, as is occurring in the Leeds Climate Innovation District, title of the project says it all there, or stylistically or typologically, as was the case in Manchester's roof gardens, where back-to-back townhouses with gardens on their roofs help to define a new local market. The third route is an entrepreneurial public sector, sharing the risk in partnership. So this is some sort of joint venture, essentially. Combines high ambitions and land holdings of the public sector. Public sector is often rich in land, but then the development know-how and resources of private developers. In the rise in Newcastle and Cutlersview and Sheffield, leadership came from suitably entrepreneurial public sector housing companies interested in delivering new market housing alongside affordable homes, examples we've seen from both of our speakers. But importantly, the profit is reinvested into more new homes. Route 4, we've got a snappy title here, utilising underutilised public infill plots in high value but deprived locations. Hilary's talked a bit about this, not necessarily deprived locations, but in the fact that we've got underutilised infill plots. We've got parking garages, leftover spaces. The local authority has tons of these, they're randomly scattered around. So the answer for this is kind of utilising public sector buildings and land holdings, poor quality public spaces. And the stories here, we've got them up, are from Oxford and Greenwich, which are led by council-owned housing companies who'd otherwise be unable to compete for land, albeit that some of these sites are rarely straightforward to develop, as Ken said with the, whatever it was, 23-party walls. Route 5 is cross-subsidising affordability and design quality. It's an important route, but perhaps one we as an industry perhaps have come to over-rely on. So this has occurred through our dependence on the untapped value of sites with locational advantages, such as Woodbury Down and Manor House Tube Station. Those make them attractive enough for private developers. I'm sure Berkeley Homes would not have touched Woodbury Down if it didn't have Manor House Tube Station on a decent line on its doorstep. This can then be used to subsidise affordable homes and high-quality design from the land value hikes associated with their development. On to Route 6, the final route in this section, and that's simply called Public Sector Vision, Leadership and Funding. Rather than looking to the private sector to deliver public benefits, instead a strong local public sector takes on the mantle from inception through to delivery and long-term management in order to build new council homes, much like Ken's described in Hackney. So this could be a combination of affordable homes programme grants and debts against housing revenue accounts, which is what we do in Haringey, and this is often topped up with right-to-buy receipts to deliver new homes. And we've got a couple of examples, Gascoigne and Goldsmith Street. So, on to the final four, and they cluster around a group focused more on optimising identified development opportunities. I'll just canter through these. So, we've got Route 7, shifting the economic equation, and this is about bridging the funding gap. And some project teams, such as at Leicester Waterside, have been remarkably adept at bringing a variety of different funding pots together to do exactly that, in essence making the development opportunity more attractive. Route 8, economies of scale, focuses on an approach that in housing sometimes has a bad press, and that's standardisation. So volume house builder standard ranges have often been derided as anywhereville homes, and we have yet to get over our negative associations of kind of post-war prefabrication, which I showed you several examples of earlier. But Matthew and his team thought standardisation also has a positive story to tell in the historic use of pattern book homes and components that still today carry a premium. So we got whole homes manufactured off-site, such as Salford's Irwell Riverside, and repeated components as well, such as in St Mary's Leicester. And these can be adapted in order to differentiate to different contexts. The ninth route is kind of getting into the nitty-gritty, and this focuses on preemptively cutting costs through continual design interrogation. This is essentially interrogating the design very early on before you get on site, and then procurement practices to make sure you know that you can optimise quality within the available budget and to know where compromise can happen and where it can't. It's kind of very early kind of value engineering. And the final route is leveraging community ambition, which focuses on the essential role of communities and how to better engage them in defining the critical design parameters of projects. The value of fundamental community engagement is, of course, difficult to overstate when it comes to overcoming distrust amongst communities and the associated resistance to development. But this can all be done in a manner that makes communities aware of the economic as well as the design parameters. And that's something we're certainly doing in Haringey, where co-design, we're talking to residents about what the art of the possible is within the budget. So they understand what the trade-offs are and how that fits into optimising design outcomes. So ultimately, in summary, there's 10 routes. While it all looks rather neat, most schemes have 2 or 3 of these, and they all relate to each other and overlap. So in theory, any one of them can be used in combination with any other. So that's a very quick canter through. You can read the full report. I think it's worth to read, QR code, or you can Google it. And I think it's quite a nice kind of juxtaposition while talking about council housing and estate regeneration as well. It also gives a national picture. So I'll invite our speakers to come to the front and we'll do a bit of Q&A. Right. Let's have a heated debate, as Mrs. Merton used to say. Is this working? Yes, it is. Right, okay, who's got a question? Joe? Do you want to say who you are and where you're from? I know you're Joe, but you can tell other people.
I'm Joe Hollyoak from Birmingham, urban designer. I'd like to invite the panel to consider the language of regeneration, which is in the title of this session. Because it's an attractive sounding term, which I think is often misused to conceal things that are more questionable. For example, in Birmingham, we've currently got 2 big projects, Druids Heath and Ladywood, which involve the replacement, the redevelopment of 1960s council estates. They're both badged as regeneration. They're both being carried out not by the council, but by appointed private developers, Lovell Homes in one case, Berkeley Homes in the other, together with a huge, considerable increase in density, greatly in the case of Ladywood, which is city centre. And so we're seeing not only we're seeing the replacement of council housing, because the developers need to make a profit, it's going to be replaced with a great proportion of housing for sale. So I think what we're seeing, as well as comprehensive redevelopment, not very different from what happened in the 60s, we're seeing a process of gentrification. Is that really regeneration?
I'll be very quick. I think some of them are and some of them aren't. No, I'd agree with you. I think regeneration is a loaded term. We don't always use it in Haringey. Some of the schemes we've been talking about, the 100% social rent schemes, I think that's less of an issue. It's where they're mixed tenure. But I might invite Ken or Hilary to maybe offer a view on that. Did you want to start, Hilary?
Yeah. I can have a go. I think there was a couple of quite interesting things. I think I completely agree with you. The language can be difficult, can be tricky, and it can mean all sorts of things. London has the benefit of a policy in the London plan, or it's actually not in the London plan, it's to do with how the mayor gives out money to do with no net loss of social rented homes. So any scheme that anyone's working on, there can be no net loss of social rented floor space. And it's amazing how hard it can be for some people to get to that and for some projects to get to that, but it can be really important. I also do worry slightly that we have to push up the price and the cost of as many private homes as possible to pay for as many affordable homes as possible, and I worry that it's basically diversifying the market in 2 directions, and that we're completely failing to deliver for any types of housing within the middle. Yes, so I know the affordable housing includes various types of intermediate, but I think there are very definite challenges, even with what's going on now, but they're in the context of a very complex and difficult housing market. But yeah, it's a very difficult language, and I completely agree with Leo. There's good versions and there's bad versions, and we maybe need to get more clear about how we decide what the bar is for good and what the bar is for less good.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that. And yeah, and you can see, I mean, my team is called, Regeneration Strategic Design. So we definitely use the term. I think we use the term because we're comfortable with the term, because we know what we're delivering, and we know that we're, sorry. Hear me. I suppose we use the term, and we use the term we don't use it cynically. And I think, as Hilary said, there's lots of ways of using language, and I think we know, we know what we're delivering. Our new homes program delivers 75% social rented homes. So, as I say, it's not a cynical exercise. I think it is genuinely regeneration. There isn't any net loss, and there's clearly questions about that side of it. And we saw Woodbury Down, and that's a different model. And I think there probably could be questions asked as to it's Berkeley Homes. I'm sure Berkeley Homes are doing very, very well out of it.
But all the social rent tenants have been rehoused in, or will be rehoused.
They will be.
So that's 100% of them going.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the net loss lies with Woodbury Down. It's not a programme I'm involved in, and it's not a programme that we're carrying forward just now. We believe in the direct delivery model. That can be a number of procurements, but the direct delivery model, where we are actually more in control of it, and that we're in control of the benefits that come about with that. We clearly don't get enough grants, so it's still cross-subsidy. We are producing market sales. We've got to maximise those market sales because it helps the subsidy to bring more social rent home. So, yeah, it's conflicted. It's massively conflicted. I wish we didn't have to do it. I wish we didn't have to produce, market sale homes, but we do, and that, of course, then leads to the potential of accusation of gentrification, because there is clear, we're probably building £1 million townhouses on some of our sites to subsidise the social rent. Yeah, see, I wish we weren't. I wish we weren't.
That's the system we're in.
It is. Sadly, it is.
I think it's a good question, Joe.
I don't know if that really answers.
Tanya, who you are, where you're from again? Someone I know.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Tanya Sennafi. I'm a conservation officer for Lewis District, and I'm doing an MA in urban design. So my question is, as a Londoner, over the last 20 years, I've seen places change so dramatically, which are on these reports the result of, and no one's really questioning the premise of the towers. Now, I know a lot of people here don't agree with me, but I really struggle with towers, and I think when I was working as a conservation designer in central London, we were absolutely no towers, and now there's sort of towers everywhere. And I noticed in some of the proposals you had tall towers, small towers, low towers, random towers. So how does one decide on the towers? And the other thing is that, we've been discussing challenging policy today. Can we challenge the policy of the densities of these places, because some of them just seem you're destroying the places and suddenly they get through an appeal or something for no real reason, and you've changed the character of a place irrevocably, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So it's the towers and the density, please.
Okay, I'll go very quickly again. Thank you, Tanya. From a Haringey point of view, you can see I'm kind of mad for estate regeneration, lots of research and reading and visiting. Generally, there are not towers, not like we saw in the 50s, 60s and 70s, in most of the council-led schemes, because certainly in Haringey, we don't do any social rent in towers. We learnt our mistake, we've pulled them down. And at Broadwater Farm, Broadwater Farm's 100% social rent, and we're not building any towers. We're going mid-rise, but we're not doing towers. And then at Love Lane, High Road West, we do have some taller buildings for viability, but they're all private for sale. The affordable housing is in, and that's with a developer. It's not an ideal scenario. I'm not going to say it's the perfect amount, but we have none of our tenants within towers because we don't think they work. The interesting examples I've seen, and this is on Holly Street and other schemes, is that towers are now beginning to be retrofitted, or have done for a number of decades, so that you only get older people in them. So Holly Street, the tower that's left, has only got old people in it. You cannot be in there unless you're over 65 because it utterly failed for families. So anyway, that's a couple of examples. I'll pass the microphone down.
Yeah, I think it's always about matching people to place, and I think there are situations where towers can work. I think a blanket of towers, towers are bad. I think we understand them more. I think we understand there's a kind of nuance. We've built 2 towers as part of our programs in Hackney, and those towers were generated through the resident engagement, because those 2 towers actually allowed the residents to live in lower blocks. And so it was generated by them and fully supported by them to bring the 2 towers. And I think, often the towers fail, because there's a bad match between those that live in them, those that want to live in them. It should be those that want to live in them rather than those forced to live in them. But also the way that they address the public realm. Both Hilary and myself talk quite a lot about the ground plane, and I think we've learned a lot about that. And certainly the 2 towers that we did build are absolutely part of an integrated public realm with the other lower scale buildings, which were the returning residents of the estate. That was estate regeneration. We did knock homes down, and the returning residents, it came through their generation. So I don't think I don't think they're blanket wrong, and I think often when you see some higher buildings, they're not towers as in objects sitting in a landscape. Often now they're part of a greater infrastructure and grow out of other buildings, like Tower Court.
Or something like that, corner of a perimeter block.
Yeah, and apart from anything else as well, and now with our new homes programme, we don't build over 18 metres because the viability in building safety, we just don't do it any longer. But I don't think they're always bad. I think that's...
I think maybe you're talking about 2 different things. There's one thing about what generally happens on public land, and we're hearing, and I think my experience is that you do get limited towers. They often tend to be the private market accommodation that pays for lower scale affordable accommodation. That typically is what happened at Tower Court, the project that Ken showed there. It has a 12-storey. I mean, in some London context, do you even consider that a tower? Yes, it is, but it's quite modest. But that was a way of keeping the frontage along the park at a modest scale and really thinking about the coherence of those blocks. Then there's a different question, and this is probably a question for inner cities in a number of big places. There is a massive proliferation of just towers generally. I agree with your concern. We need better models of mid-rise housing. We need to be testing and pushing for better models of mid-rise housing. And that works or doesn't work for different reasons in different places. Probably a different discussion than today, but I think it's a valid point. We've got to decide what it is we want. And I'm not sure at the moment we have decided what we want. I mean, this is like as a society, we're getting what the metrics around policy and finance are able to or choose to deliver. And yes, we need to decide. I'm not against all towers. I think in the right place they can work well. I think there is a problem when the only answer is a tower, which there are some types of scheme where that is the case.
Probably got time for one more question. Oh, thank you. Any bits? Yep. At the back there, did you have your hand up? Yeah, go for it. There's a microphone coming to you.
Hello. Hello, Ken. It's Amy. He's laughing already.
We're blinded here, aren't we?
Yeah. I'm really familiar with quite a lot of the projects.
Sorry, good practice. Introduce yourself.
No one else did.
They did. We had Tanya from Lewis and we had...
Okay. I'm Amy Linford and I'm from Thurrock Borough Council. And I just wanted to ask what your thoughts might be on what I'd call like a long-term post-occupancy. That sounds really dry, like, you know, the old snagging and going around a building. It's not what I mean, really, because I think we were talking earlier about how there's all these like housing issues and deprivation and the, you know, the repeating story of all these social housing estates going into disrepair, etc. And it just keeps repeating. But I'm thinking to myself, well, in 50 years' time, will someone else going to be saying the same thing about the things we're talking about now, potentially? And if we actually looked at the aims of what we were doing and then measured them, say, like 5-10 years down the line, or even looked at things that were done, you know, 5-10 years ago today, what do you think would be important maybe to put in such a review in order to understand if we're actually going in the right direction about what we're saying and doing? Not just about design, but, are those houses actually really affordable? We all know about service charges and so on and such with rent. And that was, I'm aware of the Custom House project. A lot of the residents there were really worried about the actual affordability, and they were told various figures, and, they're never realistic, and they don't tell you over time what the real payments are. So I just wanted to know what you would, the three of you, what would you think would be useful to do a reflexive practice and actually feed back if we had, unlimited time and money?
So wait there, what are the criteria for post-occupancy evaluation? Is that the question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
but
thank you.
if you had unlimited time, I'm aware that it's a time-consuming thing to do, and things we're not paid to do as consultants or council officers.
Thank you. I think I've got the question. I'm going to pass it down. I think we're a bit short on time. So I think the question is, panel, what would be, let's say, just to be quick, 3 things you would do in post-occupancy. Just quick, top of your head. You've got it in there. You just need, 3 things. All right, up to 3. How about that? So you can do 1 each if you want. Ken's looking at me right, so I'm going to go straight to Hilary.
I'll go first. So my problem with post-occupancy evaluation, I think it's a brilliant thing. I think it's a really important thing. Through my whole career, everyone's been talking about it, but no one's really doing it consistently across anything, is I think we need some kind of public, external, accepted measure. I don't know, is it building regs or is it something else? We need to be able to see everyone else's post-occupancy evaluation. We need to agree some common questions. There's been some really interesting work done in the past while, but I still see everyone saying, oh, we should be, but I don't see it happening. So the thing I would say is the most important thing about post-occupancy evaluation is we find a way of making it happen consistently all the time and sharing the data.
That's a really good point, Hilary. Thank you.
And I think I go back to my point about making neighbourhoods. I think the POE shouldn't be shrink wrapped into just what we've built, but it's actually about the neighbourhood. So I think anything we do should extend the boundaries and actually talk about how it has changed the neighbourhood. I don't think you can do it in any less time scale than 5, probably 10 years, because these things take so long to actually establish themselves. But I would definitely extend it to ask around the whole neighbourhood to see how it's actually affected them, as well as those just in the buildings that we're building.
I can't better that. Those are 2 really good answers. So hopefully that's, I can see some nodding and a thumbs up, that's good. We've run slightly over time, so please can we thank our speakers? Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Hilary. Great job.